The two babies were memorized at the passing forest. They had started to passing trees as the train moved forward. Eventually, they did get bored of that and started to color. By this point, their nap time was getting close. They were eating their lunch as they continued to color. You two are easily travelers. Most kids get fussy when they go on long road trips, Vince said. Danielle shrugged and said, Forest's pretty. Yeah, Clementine said with a smile. Yeah, you do have a point there, Vince said. I miss why. He's nice, Clementine said with a frown. Yeah, I'm sure we'll see him again, Lee said to Clementine. What about Mommy and Daddy? They still look for me in Atlanta? Clementine asked. They might be, honey, but who knows? They might still be in Savannah, Lee said. Clementine began to cry and sobbed. I want Mommy and Daddy. Lee frowned and pulled the toddler in for a hug. I know, baby. We're trying, Lee said. He figured that the toddler was tired and missed her parents. She cried for a few more minutes while Lee rubbed circles on her back. After a few minutes, Lee could tell that the toddler felt more like dead weight in his arms. She was asleep. Lee looked towards Danielle and asked, Clem lost Mommy like me? It was a brutal day when the group had to tell her that her mom was killed by Danny St. John. Vince was there to comfort her, but she was still very upset. I don't know, sweetie. None of us know what really happened, Lee said. Her mom and dad took a trip to Savannah, which is where we're going, Lee said. Is it far? Danielle asked. Yeah, but we'll get there by tomorrow morning. We're in a fast train now, Vince said. Yeah, Danielle said, before she yawned. All right, baby girl, let's get you some sleep, Vince said. I don't wanna, Danielle said. She would try to wrestle out of his grip, but she was too tired to get out. It seems like you don't have a choice, Vince said. He placed a pacifier in her mouth, and she began to shut her eyes. A few minutes passed by now until Vince said, You're going to have to tell her what happened. The longer you wait, the more distraught she'll be. Lee sighed and said, I know. I'm just not ready for when that happens. She'll be devastated. You'll be there for her, just like how I was there with Danielle, Vince said. I know. I hate to break it to her that her parents are gone, Lee said. There was silence between the two men after that. Lee looked down at the toddler. He didn't want to tell her that her mom and dad are gone. He contemplated all the way through how the conversation would end. None of them would be good. Lee was broken out of his thoughts when he felt the girl squirm. She was awake and looked up at Lee with big eyes and cuddled into him. Mommy and Daddy gone? Lee huffled and said, I don't know for sure, Clem, but I think so. The day I found you, I went into your house and found the answering machine. Your mommy's voice was on there. She sounded okay in the first message, frantic in the second, and finally sad in the last. The toddler whimpered and said, I want them. I know you do, baby. I'm sorry, Lee said. He went back to soothing the toddler as she cried again. Lee got out another tissue. He could tell that she needed to blow her nose again. She sniffled as the crying ended. All right, sweetie, Lee said. He placed the toddler on his lap. You got buggies again. He then pressed down on one nostril as she blew through her nose. All right, one more time, Lee said. And he pressed down the other nostril and cleaned up the remaining snot with the tissue. Good job, Lee discarded the tissue as the toddler looked up at him. You can go ahead and color, but you can't run around. Not when we're on the train, Lee said. Okay, Clementine said with a frown. You okay, honey? Lee asked. Clementine looked back up and she said, You still take care of me still? Of course, honey. I'll always be here for you, Lee said. Clementine smiled and she said, Good, thank you. You're welcome, Lee said. He let the young girl cuddle up on his lap as she colored in her coloring book. She did her best to color in between the lines, but it didn't turn out that way. She still tried to get better at coloring. It wasn't long until Danielle woke up as well. Did you have a nice nap? Vince asked. The toddler nodded in response before she stood up. Vince took her small hand and said, You can't walk around, Danny. Why not? Danielle asked. The train is very dangerous. You might trip and fall off. Then you'll get hurt, Vince said. Danielle sighed and she said, Okay. We ought to see if Ken would stop the train for a little while so they get to play around, Lee said. I'm sure Duck would appreciate getting out and stretching his legs as well. Yeah, I'm sure he would, Vince said. Everything was calm for the next few minutes, until Kenny heard a shout over the PA system. "Oh shit! Hang on, everyone!" Kenny exclaimed. Lee and Vince took a hold of one of the metal bars that made up the skeleton of the boxcar while holding on to the toddler that they were holding. The train screeched to a halt, with both toddlers up to them with confusion. "What's going on?" Clementine asked. "Not sure yet," Lee said. As he got up with his arm around her waist, he went outside and placed her on the ground. Clementine wanted to run around. She was trying to drag Lee, but Lee wasn't sure if this area was safe. Vince had the same problem with Danielle. She wanted to run around and release some of her energy. The two men saw why Kenny stopped the train. There was a diesel truck trailer dangling over the road. Kenny, Katja, Duck, and Ben, and Bud, and Chuck all got off the train, then gathered around to the new problem they had faced. "Fuck! Fuck! 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 Fuck!" Clement, Duck, Kenny exclaimed. Lee cringed at every F-bomb dropped. Danielle and Clementine seemed frightened by the horrified men. "Kenny, the children heard that!" Katja snapped. Kenny huffed out of breath and looked at the wrecked trailer. "Maybe we can walk?" Ben suggested. Bud shook his head and said, "No, we're still a long ways away from Savannah." I don't know," Chuck said. "I don't got much of experiences with y'all's fortitude, but we could probably deal with that. I mean, we got a damn train," Chuck said. "A train isn't full of milk, Charles. It's a gas and diesel, something that will explode," Kenny said. "You ought to load yourself. There's a crew here, Chuck said. "This ain't shit," Kenny snapped. He stared Chuck down. "This," Chuck said, but was interrupted by a new voice. "Hey, if you guys keep screaming like that, you're going to get your faces chewed off," a man said. The group looked up and see a man and a woman on top of the bridge. The man appeared to be much shorter than the woman, but they did seem to be about the same age. "Are you having trouble? Because if you are going to be trouble, we could have just kept walking," the woman said. Kenny went for his gun, but was stopped by Bud. "If they meant do harm to us, they would have attacked us already." He looked up and said, "No, we're friendly." "That's what everybody says," the woman said. "We know," Bud said. "Let's give these guys a break," the man said to the woman. "We'll see," the woman replied. They turned back to look at the group and the man said, "So is there a problem with your train?" Yeah, you're standing in front of it," Kenny said. "Dude, it's wrecked. It's not bad up from up here. Send your buddy here to check it out," the man said. Bud walked over to the ladder and went up to the bridge. "Careful, Bud," Lee said. "I will," Bud said. He then went up to the ladder on top of the bridge. Lee could feel Clementine tug onto his arm. "I play," Clementine whined. "Okay, just don't go too far," Lee said. Clementine nodded before she started off to play. Danielle also ran off, and Duck joined them along with Katja. Lee looked up to the bridge and waited for his brother to come down. The man and the woman didn't seem so bad, but it was hard to tell nowadays. He continued to watch them as they talked. "What's keeping him so long? We need to get going again," Kenny said. "Be patient. People could be tricky nowadays," Chuck said. "Thank you, Captain Obvious," Kenny muttered. Chuck chose to ignore Kenny's bad behavior. However, he still gave him an angry look. Lee then looked back to Kenny. He certainly wasn't being reasonable. Of course he never really was reasonable, but now it just seemed that he was snapping at everything that moved. Lee heard footsteps coming down the ladder. He saw his younger brother down with a woman and a man. Bud approached the group, who tensed up at the sight of them. "Hey guys, this is Omid and Krista. They're going to help us get the tanker down," Bud said. "Hey, we just wanted to say that the train looks cool. We're wondering if we could tag along," Omid said. There was a dead silence among the group. "But we're not looking for charity," Krista said. "But we could help you guys," Omid said. "Probably," Krista added. "I saw that there was a train station not far from there," Bud said. "I'm going to check it out and see if I can find something to cut the tanker loose." "Sounds like a plan," Kenny said. Lee then turned around upon hearing a squeal of laughter. He was happy to see the kids having fun. "Whoa, damn dude, you guys have a kid and a couple of toddlers? That's so awesome. I haven't seen a kid, let alone babies, for a long time," Omid said, as he joined Lee. Lee chuckled and said, "Yeah, they're good. You want to go see them?" "Absolutely," Krista said. Lee walked over to the two toddlers who were running around and trying to catch Duck. Lee smirked before he ran over and picked up Clementine. The toddler laughed and squealed as she tried to wrestle out of his grip. "Down, please," Clementine said. "In a minute, baby girl. Do you want to meet these new people?" Lee said. Clementine looked over at Omid and Krista, and then she nodded her head. "Yeah," Clementine said. Lee walked over with the toddler in his arms. "My gosh, look at her. She's so adorable and well-mannered," Krista said. "Her parents raised her well," Lee said. "We don't mind if I hold her?" Krista asked. Lee looked at the toddler and said, "Clem, would you be okay if Krista held you?" "I'd be okay," Clementine said. Lee smiled before he handed the toddler off to Krista. Surprisingly, the toddler cuddled into Krista. Meanwhile, the woman slightly bobbed her in her arms. "She's so precious," Krista said. "Where's her parents?" "Savannah. I'm not exactly sure what happened to them," Lee said. "She is a cutie. I'm sure she causes plenty of mayhem," Omid said. "Nah, she's really good," Lee said. "Both are actually pretty good." The group soon heard footsteps approaching, and it was Danielle. She had her arms up in the air to gesture for Krista to pick her up. She must have been jealous that she wasn't getting as much attention. Krista adjusted her grip on Clementine and with her hip before she squatted down and picked up Danielle. "So what's this cutie's name?" Krista asked. "This is Danielle, but we usually shorten it to Danny," Vince said. "You girls have pretty names," Krista said. "Thanks," the two girls said. "Can you spell the shortened versions of your names?" Krista asked. The two toddlers contemplated it until Clementine said, "I try." "Me too," Danielle said. "Okay, Danielle, you go first." "Spell Danny," Krista said. "D-A-N-I," Danielle said. "Good job," Krista said. Then she looked over at Clementine and said, "Okay, Clementine, can you spell Clem?" "K-L-E-M," Clementine spelled. "You're so close. What else makes a cuss sound?" Krista said. "Oh, C," Clementine said. "Yes, now can you spell it?" Krista asked. Clementine nodded her head and said, "C-L-E-M." "Very good," Krista said. She leaned down and placed the two toddlers on the ground. They rather seemed smart. "You have no idea," Vince said. "We play now?" Danielle asked. "Yeah, go ahead, but don't go too far," Vince said. Danielle nodded before she ran back over to Duck and Katja. Clementine followed her behind her. "I can't tell you how long it's been since we've seen kids," Krista said. "Yeah, they certainly keep you on your toes," Lee said with a smirk. Duck and the girls went back to playing until they heard Chuck playing on his guitar. They went over and sat in front of the man to listen to him to play with his guitar. The adults came over and joined them. For once they were calm. Usually Duck was all over the place, and Clementine and Danielle were being so young. It was only natural for them to be all over the place. Lee walked over and sat next to Clem. She looked up at him as she asked, "Can I have my binky?" "Yeah, I'll go get it," Lee said. He then got up and walked back inside the train to retrieve the backpack that belonged to Clementine. It had most of her baby supplies and some of her toys inside. He got out of the boxcar to see Bud coming back over. He was carrying a blowtorch and was huffing. "Bud, you alright?" Lee asked. "Yeah, I think," Bud said between his huffs. "That train station had walkers. Don't worry, I handled it." "Bud, you should have headed back over and get help," Lee said. He approached his younger brother. "I handle it. Besides, you have to look after Clem," Bud said. "Bud, she would have been fine if you would have had just come and get me. She's okay," Lee said. "We still have a strong group to look after her." "Yeah, I guess you got a point," Bud said. Lee sighed and said, "Here, she wants her pacifier. It probably wouldn't hurt giving her a toy. Go get yourself cleaned up. I'll handle cutting down the tanker." "You sure?" Bud asked. "Positive," Lee said. "Just make sure you get cleaned up first. She might be scared of you with all that blood on you." "Yeah, okay," Bud said. "You didn't get bit, right?" Lee asked. "I didn't get bit. I'm just under a lot of stress at the moment," Bud said. I can't believe I lost Carly. She made me really happy. I loved her." "I know, Bud. She'll be missed," Lee said. He placed a comforting hand on his younger brother's shoulder. A couple of minutes passed until Bud said, "Thanks, Lee." He then walked over to the boxcar and cleaned up, while Lee hauled the blowtorch up the ladder.